Hey, what's up, guys? John here. Are we going to be stepping into massive food shortages in America? It's a real question. In the last 18 to 24 months, what have we seen? What have we become more normalized to? Is seeing less and less items on the shelf at stores. We're seeing, many situations in which we go to a restaurant or go to a coffee shop and they're out of, one or two items. It's becoming more normalized, right? And that's very, not a big deal. It's very minimal. But the question I have is, where does this actually go? Where are we heading to? Because it seems as though we're stepping into a problem. We're not stepping out of a problem. Every couple weeks, every month, there's a bigger and bigger and bigger problem unfolding. And when I look overseas, look at places like Africa, it's getting even worse there by a massive, massive move. It's getting much worse. Even Sri Lanka, it's horrible. You look at other places, Egypt, they can't get bread. There's many places where things are just getting really bad. The question I have is, what is rising gas prices? And as we make this transition off of fossil fuels, what is this going to look like for the delivery of this food, right? Especially as we step into an inflationary environment with all the restrictions and everything that's happening overseas, what is this actually going to look like, right? So in Fortune magazine, they came out and they said end of days. And then they put out these really big, scary headlines, but then it makes you actually think that, and then they end up with something very small, like, oh, it's just beer, popcorn, and sriracha, right? But it seems almost as though they're saying this to kind of prepare you, or at least put out the notion in which things could actually get worse. And we see this article here, how is the crisis in Ukraine causing a global food shortage? This ongoing Ukraine-Russia war, which has intensified since the beginning of February, is leading to a food crisis in developing countries around the world. The stoppage of food exports in Ukraine has worsened pre-existing conditions. The post-pandemic demand for food, extreme weather conditions, supply chain bottlenecks, export restrictions have negatively impacted the food market. The invasion has added to widespread inflation in food prices throughout the world, pushing for Food and Agricultural Organization's food price index to an all-time high, the highest that it's been since 1990. The UN World Food Program Executive Director has said that the conflict and climate crisis, the pandemic, and surging food and fuel costs have created a perfect storm. And now we've got the war in Ukraine piling catastrophe on top of catastrophe. Somalia is one of the countries facing the implications of the war. The country is facing an unprecedented shortage of wheat stemming from the halted exports from Russia and Ukraine, as the export route through the Black Sea has been shut down since the war began on February 24th. According to the UN, the East African country has an estimated 13 million people facing severe hunger resulting from persistent drought. Ukraine, on the other hand, needs to export 22 million grains out of the country as it needs space to store grain from their next harvest. However, Russia's blockade of the Black Sea port is halting the export of corn, barley, repossessed oil, and wheat. Other African countries, which have also little say in the ongoing conflict, are affected too. Egypt, bread is a staple. A meal without bread is not a real meal. And the country relies on imported wheat to meet more than half of the daily wheat and calorie requirements. Ukraine and Russia provide 85% of the country's imports. From 2020 and 2021, Ukraine was expected to constitute approximately 12% of global wheat exports in 2022, consequently affecting countries like Tunisia, Somalia, Egypt, Algeria, if it is unable to export grain. Tunisia is also being ravaged by a financial crisis and struggling to deal with an inflation rate of over 6%. Most of its population is meeting their daily needs by relying on subsidized semola and flour. However, with the global inflation in prices, these producers are only available in the black market at costlier rates. Algeria has completely stopped exports of semola, pasta, wheat products to prevent depletion of its stocks. The country has some relief through its oil export industry. Now, this is what's happening in Sri Lanka right now. They're saying Sri Lanka's economy has been facing one of the worst ever economic crisis since the independence of Britain in 1948, resulting in the mismanagement of government finances, right? Corruption, ill-timed tax cuts, and then the impact. So probably restrictions and problems over there. Everything is coming to a head in Sri Lanka. And this is something that we don't really hear too much about here. And so I wonder, everything that's happening all across the world, how bad could things actually get here? Let's say, for example, you have 325 million Americans, a lot of which live paycheck to paycheck. As gas prices rise and interest rates rise and the cost to borrow debt gets very, very challenging. If we step into a situation where food prices are through the roof and people can't afford food at the same level that they can currently afford it, what will this actually look like? Could we see a situation where maybe we don't have true food shortages? Maybe what we have is maybe a reduction in food by 20% or 15%, and people just start to get scared. Maybe their anxiety is already through the roof and they're already feeling very, very nervous, and they go to the store, they start to see less and less food, people start bulk buying, and this bulk buying becomes an actual real shortage, right? And then this actual real shortage, maybe we can't replenish the shelves as quickly as we once could have. And that's just the big question. How people's behavior is really the big question. How people's behavior, coupled with what's happening on the world, how will this actually play out, right? Sri Lanka shuts down family struggle for food as crisis deepens. New Delhi, schools and government offices in Sri Lanka, major cities were shut down Monday for at least a week as severe fuel shortages nearly brought the country to a standstill. The latest chapter in a slow-moving economic crisis had led to protest, political turmoil, and mounting food insecurity. Many streets in the normally bustling capital, Colombo, were largely deserted. Armed forces stood guard at gas stations as lines of vehicles extended for miles. The hour-long waits have led to tense standoffs and violent confrontations in recent days between frustrated Sri Lankans and security forces. In a blunt statement, the Energy Ministry asked the public to refrain from lining up for gasoline for the next 3 days. Authorities announced last week that government workers, barring these essential fields such as healthcare, would work from home given the current fuel shortage and issues in transport facilities. An auto rickshaw driver in Colombo said he waited 2 days to get the 7 liters, about 2 gallons of gas, which he estimated would last only a day. He said it's becoming impossible to feed his family. Crucial talks between Sri Lankan government and the IMF for a bailout package has been held in Colombo this week. In April, the country suspended payments on its foreign debt, which stands at $51 billion. The talks are important first step for averting economic ruin, experts said, but are only a starting point. Even with the IMF program, the money from the loans will not be enough to restore everything that is needed to put Sri Lanka in a turnaround situation. Life has become a daily struggle for many in the island nation of 23 million as it endures its worst economic crisis in decades. The big question, people think that this can't come to America and that, that's Sri Lanka or that's India or that's, this country or that country. If we look at what's happening across the world, we are all basically following the same path. We're all headed into problems. Every single country, with almost no exception, is heading into a bigger problem today than they were yesterday, right? And so we can't write anything off by saying, that's definitely not going to happen simply because we haven't experienced it in the past. We've had it so good for so long. I personally think that anything is possible. Food inflation reached 57% last month, and a recent survey by the World Food Program conducted 17 in 25 districts found that most families are feeling the effects of hunger. The big red flags were found among the poor, who had resorted to skipping meals, eating much smaller meals, or buying cheaper food that is not nutritious. We're even hearing the same thing happening with McDonald's. They're cutting certain things out of the menu. We have to rely on handouts, or even those that are not as frequent now. Public anger over economic mismanagement has spilled out onto the streets. Months-long protests resulted in May resignation of Prime Minister, right? But his brother continues to serve as the president. Sri Lankan neighbors are lending a helping hand. India sent food, fuel, and medicine, while Australia announced a $50 million in assistance, including food and health services. But a lack of foreign reserves and high global food prices have made it difficult for the government to import essential items, while runaway inflation and widespread unemployment mean most families can't afford what's on the shelves. What do you think about this? Do you think we're stepping into a situation in America where, we could experience big problems? I'm very, very curious as what do you think? On this channel, I talk about personal finance, real estate, business, and money. And food and the economy and what's actually happening is going to impact everything else. And I think that we are stepping into a very big turning point. But I'm curious as to what do you think? Please drop your comments below. Let's have a conversation about this. Subscribe. You're also subscribed to my second channel. It's going to be an interactive call-in show coming up this week. The link for that is down below, top comment. And you can follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok for short-form content. If you need help establishing a strong credit score, you need help with your credit, I have a team of amazing credit repair specialists that work in-house with me at cashnow.video. If you want to get started on YouTube, get on the YouTube grind with me, cashnow.video. If you want to invest in real estate when things hit the fan, cashnow.video. Catch you guys in the next one.